Thank you for staying with us on Health Digest, where we are highlighting pediatric emergencies, those pediatric emergencies that are commonly likely to occur in the household. We've looked at choking, we've looked at an unconscious child who needs resuscitation. On this second part, we are looking at a child who has sustained injuries either from a fall from a building or a fall from a tree, and also a child who sustained burns. And we'll start straight away from a child who's fallen. It could be a building, it could be a tree. When this child has fallen, and let's say there's a parent or the caregiver is attending to this child who's fallen down, what are the immediate things that they are supposed to do?
So the child is in a safe environment. As much as possible, maybe try and avoid moving the child too much, because one of the things you're worried about is the fact that they may have broken their neck, and you really don't want to, make it worse by trying to move the child around, unless you've really controlled, the circumstances under which they're able to move around. Check, is the child conscious? Is he still conscious? If he's not conscious, then that's when you want to do, these other maneuvers which we're going to show you. So she puts one hand on the baby's forehead, stimulates the child. The reason you're doing that is because you don't want the child to suddenly wake up and move their neck if they've already broken, because really any movement, as I said, is likely to worsen, the condition of the neck.
They may be paralyzed.
Precisely, exactly. So immediately after that, of course, shout for help, ensure that help is on the way. Okay, some ambulance, whatever it is that can provide help. So, just moving in slightly. So essentially what she wants to do, I'm just going to move in slightly just for the sake of demonstration. So notice she may either kneel down or, just bend in sort of in a position where her elbows are on the surface. It could be the ground, it could be on a table, whatever surface it is, her elbows need to be on the surface. The reason why is because she needs to stabilize herself. So that even she should not be, standing up, because even somebody pushes her, there's a lot of activity around. She might topple over, with the child. And
so therefore, if you're on the ground, you just kneel down.
Yes, kneel down and put your elbows on the ground. Okay, and then both hands, she puts them over the child's shoulders. Okay, and then she's going to perform what you call a jaw thrust. So essentially, what a jaw thrust means, she puts her thumbs on the baby's cheeks on both sides. Okay, so putting both thumbs on the cheeks, and then with the index finger, okay, she's going to put them at the edge of, we call it the angle of the jaw. Okay, so where the jaw sort of bends, just, right there next to the ear. And then she's going to sort of, using opposing movements of the thumb against, the index finger, sort of try and open the mouth. Okay, sort of make it fall open. So in the process of opening, the mouth, just to ensure that, the child can first of all begin to breathe, So because if the mouth is closed, likely the child might not breathe as expected. So remember, what she's also trying to do is to put both her hands against the child's shoulders, so she sort of stabilizes the child's head against the body. Okay, so after that, because, you can't maintain that position throughout, we're going to get what we call head blocks. Okay, so for now we've used towels. Okay, so using towels which you've rolled up and just applied some tape so it forms a nice roll. So you put one head block on one side, and these are things that you can make quickly even at home. So she puts the other head block on the other side. Okay, and she removes her fingers as she does so and holds the child's head in that position, and then you're going to get some tape which is right somewhere there. Okay, and you can use even just plain sellotape, just anything that you can use to sort of secure these towels against the baby's head. Remember, if you're having, if it's a bed with sheets, remove the sheets so that you're taping the child's head against the bed itself. So you really don't want to tape on the sheets, because the sheets will move. If you need to lift up the child, then the sheets might move and end up stabilizing. So you're taping the baby's head against his head. So you're running the tape right over the towels. Okay, and you cut. You give me the second one. So we do a second one. This second tape goes over the child's forehead. Okay. And just that simple maneuver alone helps to stabilize the baby's head. So remember, you're doing this in a child who is unconscious. If the child is conscious, then you have a bigger problem in your hands, because likely this child will try and fight you. Okay, so they'll try and wake up and try and because they want to be free and that kind of thing. Well, usually what happens is that if a child has actually gotten an injury on the neck, it's a very painful thing. So a lot of times you find this child will not want to move, because any movement is very painful, and therefore they will want to sort of maintain that position. So what you can try and do is explain to the child, I want you to stay still, okay, and I'm going to put these blocks around you, so just make sure you're fine. So it will take a lot of counseling. If you can get the parent, just to be there, talk to the child, try and just keep him calm, okay, that alone might help.
Assuming this is a child on the ground,
yes.
There's no bed to tape all this.
Yes.
How do you stabilize the neck?
So you may need to have somebody who simply holds the child's head in that position, okay, and sort of remain in that position until you can sort of transport this child into a vehicle. So maybe one of the things that you can also do is get even if it's a mattress or some hard surface material which the child can lie on, and then what you do is put the the board, whatever it is, underneath. So you roll the child over to the side. Well, we could do that. So let's simulate that. So assuming Rana is holding the baby's head, so you'll have a second person like myself who will come over, maybe put my hand over the child's shoulder and my other hand beneath the leg. And then we're going to perform something we call a log roll. So at the count of 3, we are going to turn the baby. So I'm going to tell Rana, the count of 3, and we are rolling this child over to my side. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to ask you to put whatever board.
Assume this is a hard board.
Yes, assuming that is a hard board. Okay, and then at the count of 3, we're going to roll the child back. 1, 2, 3. Put the child back in that position, and then now do the head blocks. So
now you are able to.
Yes, then you can be able to take the child over for care. But remember, again, we don't want the child to lie on the handboard for too long. Okay, so remember, it's just an emergency transport device, because if they lie on the board for too long, they can begin to develop what you call sores. Okay, and that's something you really don't want them to have, because it takes a long time for those kind of sores to heal. Okay, so immediately get the child over to hospital. Remember, we are not advising you to use a collar in children, because a lot of time, previously we used to use a collar tied down the child, but you find for a lot of children it's very uncomfortable. Sometimes it may cause a bit of blockage in terms of blood supply to the brain. So we're moving away from suggesting that you use a collar. Just use head blocks. Usually they're sufficient. They'll get you to hospital, and then you can be able to get further help.
So once they're in the hospital,
yes.
What should the parents or the person who's brought the child
yes.
to hospital expect from you at the emergency department?
Okay, so if the child is not already on head blocks, those will be provided in that situation. So remember, of course, the initial assessment still happens first of all. Of course, just ensuring safety for the child, establishing whether they're conscious or unconscious, and of course, calling, for teams to come, because usually this kind of situation is usually managed by a team of doctors and nurses. In some hospitals, you find they have what you call a trauma team, okay, which is a team that's already trained to function in those kind of situations or those kind of circumstances. They'll call for that team to come over. So in the meantime, the personnel within the emergency department will put the child again in a separate place, apply the blocks if they're not already in place, and then begin, the assessment. Assuming that the child is breathing and, the heart is beating okay, so what they'll do is immediately just, put some lines on the child. So they'll put, large lines on both the child's arms, and then administer maybe some fluid, because some of the things that actually kill children who have some kind of trauma, either one is lack of oxygen, so administer oxygen, or if the blood pressure falls, okay, for one reason or the other. Maybe they were bleeding, because especially if they hit their head on the ground, the head tends to be supplied with a lot of blood, so they can easily bleed out. So they fix 9 so they're able to administer some fluids, or may request for some blood. Okay, and those are the immediate, resuscitation measures. And then once they stabilize the child, well, the first thing they'll think of doing is either X-rays. Usually the X-rays of the head don't work very well. So in a lot of centers now we have what we call CT scans. Okay, so CT scan will be done to check, if there's any sort of bleeding within the brain, because if there's bleeding within the brain, depending on what kind of bleeding is happening, then that might determine whether or not a surgeon needs to come in and remove that bleed or that clot of blood, because that clot of blood will cause pressure on the brain and cause complications for that particular child. So in addition to that, they'll also do a couple of other X-rays just to check were there any other fractures, bony fractures. Could be the arm, it could be the leg, whatever it is that has broken. Okay, some cases they may also do additional tests, like looking inside the stomach, okay, or what we call the abdomen, exactly. So they do an ultrasound check, is there any bleeding inside the abdomen, so that now they're able to deal with that, because excessive bleeding itself can worsen the child's condition. Yeah.
So this is a child.
Yes.
Do you expect an infant to come because of a fall?
Well, it would be very unusual. If you think about it, an infant cannot walk, or cannot, come out of, fall from a balcony, for example. So if somebody comes and says, my 6-month-old baby fell from the balcony, I would want to question how did that happen, and usually the first thing you think about is there some ongoing, we call it child abuse, or it could be, in our own terms, we call it non-accidental injury. In other words, this happened deliberately, for one reason or the other. So there are certain clues or questions that we would ask, and there are certain things that we look out for that will tell us likely maybe there's some ongoing child abuse, and such a situation might require for us to, call in a social worker, maybe call in the authorities to try and investigate and find out what happened in that circumstance, even as we treat that baby. Okay, so it would be very unusual for, say, a less than 2-year-old falling from a balcony. That would be quite unusual. So
let's look at burns. Assuming this child has come in with burns, one of the commonest questions we get is, daktari amesema 3rd-degree burns, 2nd-degree burns, 50%.
Yes.
How do you come with these degrees and percentages?
There's something we call the rule of 9s. Okay, so for example, they say that the baby's head is about 2 9s, so you talk about 18%. So if it's the entire head which is burnt, you say maybe one arm is 9, the other arm is about 9%, the front surface of the body is about another 9, the back surface is another 9, and you talk about also the, in terms of, we call them the lower limbs, okay, or the legs. Okay, so another 9, another 9. If you add this whole total, it probably come to about 100%. And there are certain other areas of the body which are considered special areas if you get burnt. The face, if around the groin area, some of those special areas which we consider, if you get a burn over that area, it's a lot more harder to treat you. So therefore you need to be admitted, to be managed. And then when you're talking about the degree, you're talking about the depth. Okay, so the depth of the burn. So depending on how bad the burn is, you can either have what you call the 1st-degree burn, a 2nd-degree burn, or a 3rd-degree burn. So essentially a 1st-degree burn is a very shallow burn. Okay, so just involving the upper surface of the skin, and then you have a 2nd-degree burn which involves almost the entire skin itself, because the skin is also has layers. Okay, so almost the entire skin itself is affected. 3rd-degree burns, you're talking about the entire skin, including some of the structures which are below the skin. So this can include the muscles, can involve even the bones and those kind of surfaces. So obviously, and sometimes it's difficult for you to tell what is the degree of burn immediately a child comes in, or even for an adult. It's not immediately apparent. It becomes apparent after some time, after some period of treatment, that this is actually the depth of the burn. And depending on how deep it is, then it determines what sort of treatment you get. So basically, when you do get a burns, and remember burns can occur due to many reasons. One of the most common reasons why children get burns is because sometimes mother was boiling water either for taking a shower or wanted to cook some tea. You find sometimes mother could be boiling the water on a jiko or even on a cooker, but you find maybe the handle is hanging out, and the baby can simply hold the handle and pull it down and splash water on themselves, and that's a very very common reason for burns. When you come to a hospital, one of the things that we do is to assess how extensive is the burn, and there are certain formulas that doctors use. There's formulas that apply to adults, and there are formulas that also apply to children, and they're sort of different in certain ways. The reason why we want to know how extensive the burn is because it helps us to know how much fluids to give, because once your skin is burnt, the skin acts as a barrier and it prevents you from losing water into the environment. If you have extensive burns, ideally you should be sent to what we call a burns unit, which is what helps you to manage such a child. Okay, so they have a specialized unit. It's almost like an ICU. You're isolated, you're kept in a protective environment where management can be given or administered to that child for a prolonged period of time to get them back to recovery.
What are the things that somebody should do at home as they prepare to come to hospital, and the things that they should not do as they prepare to come to hospital because of a child who has sustained burn injuries?
Well, sometimes we just say the first thing is to cool down the burnt area, and sometimes it might be something as simple as just cool water over that burn surface area. Sometimes we just say just cover it, say with some clean dressing, and then take the child to hospital. Don't administer things like Vaseline, because the oil itself sometimes may worsen the burn to a certain extent. So there are certain creams that can be used to be able to treat those kind of burns. But usually the first thing we advise is just cool the area. It can be just as simple as putting the arm under a tap of running water, so just to cool it, because the heat itself is what causes destruction in terms of the skin, and I think that's basically what I would advise for now. Yes.
What other things do people do that they should not do, just apart from probably applying some jelly on top of the burnt area?
Well, sometimes people will stay with these burns even at home, thinking that they'll somehow get treated and they'll get better. And you find over time they get some secondary infection, and it becomes even worse over time, or even just gets contaminated with soil or dirt, whatever it is. So sometimes it's just important to just make sure that is well taken care of. At least have somebody look at it, somebody who is specialized to be able to provide the proper treatment for it.
When they come to the emergency department, what now do you do to this child who has sustained burns?
Okay.
And what are those critical areas that you are looking for, hopefully hoping that they haven't gotten burned?
Yes. Well, of course, some of the things that we worry, especially for what you call open film burns, is inhalation, especially in terms of smoke inhalation. So sometimes you find that when they inhale some smoke, it can cause certain reactions again in the lungs, and sometimes even just hot steam from hot water. A child will inhale that, and initially they might be completely fine, but over time they begin to swell around the what you call the airway, and it can become a dangerous thing, especially because if the swelling becomes really huge, then it can block the airway. So you would want to assess for some of those things. So again, as part of your emergency care, your ABCs still come into play.
Any final word on pediatric emergencies or emergencies that touch on children and infants?
Yeah, so I think for me the key message here is prevention. If one can prevent it from getting there, because children are wonderful in the sense that they'll tell you long before they collapse that I'm sick, please do something about me. And if you don't do something about me, I'm going to get there, I'm going to collapse. Okay, so if you can prevent a lot of these things. Talk about it, like we mentioned, diarrhea, vomiting, give them fluids. If a child, is developing a pneumonia, get them checked out, let them be seen, try and, prevent these things by, getting them vaccinated, and keeping them warm. There are certain prevention measures that you can do. We've talked about trauma. We said if your child is traveling in a car, doesn't have a car seat, please buy one. It will save you the millions. You might think that a car seat is expensive, but wait until you get to hospital. That's when you realize just how expensive it can be. Prevention is the key thing. Don't get to this point where we have to do this kind of maneuvers. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much for these simulations.
Yes.
Many thanks for staying with us. Many thanks to the Aga Khan University Hospital, Nairobi, who's made this pediatric emergencies simulation a possibility. That's all we had for you today on Health Digest. God bless. I'm Dr. Mercy Korir.